Who Dat Nation, it seems like Derek Carr is about to be your next starting quarterback for the Saints. We'll talk about them winning the Derek Carr sweepstakes, what it means for this team. Does it make the Saints the favorite in the NFC South? Where do they go from here? All that coming up right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
What is up, Who Dat Nation? Welcome back inside a special edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. And after weeks of speculation and a long night of thinking about whether or not Derek Carr was going to go to the Jets instead of the Saints, it gets reported today that Derek Carr is going to New Orleans. It's going to be a 4-year deal. The exact specifics of the contract have not come out yet. Maybe they'll come out while I'm live streaming. So if anyone sees it, you can throw it in the chat. But right now, the rumor is 4-year deal for Derek Carr to join the New Orleans Saints. Now, before we get into all that, just want to remind you guys that this podcast is sponsored by DraftKings Sportsbook. And with the NCAA tournament coming up, you can bet $5 on college hoops and get $200 in bonus bets if you use the promo code BOOT. That's at DraftKings Sportsbook. You guys can use the app and use promo code BOOT. So let's get into this Derek Carr sweepstakes. Let's talk about all. Let's go for starters here. I think there's going to be a lot of people split on this. There's going to be some people who are amped up about it, and I can see from the chat there are some people that are glad the search is over, and some are happy that Derek Carr is coming in, and I could certainly kind of see that energy. And on the flip side, there will be people who are not exactly happy about this and talking about how it's unfair for certain situations and certain players, and maybe Derek Carr is not your guy. And I totally get it. Whichever side of the coin you're on, I respect it. I don't think Derek Carr is elite enough for everyone to unanimously be like, let's go. The Saints got their guy. We are amped up for the 2023 season. But I'll tell you how I feel about it, and then we'll go from there. For starters, this is the one thing that I think about when the Saints land Derek Carr. I think for once, it kind of feels like the Saints finally got something done in negotiations. And I know last year people were torn on the same exact subject, but when Deshaun Watson was there and the Saints missed out, and I know he got a ridiculous contract and that's what it felt like, there was starting to be that doubt as to, can the Saints close? Do the Saints have a regime where we have doubts about DA? We have doubts about Pete Carmichael. Are they able to land free agents, big name free agents, when the time comes? Well, by getting Derek Carr in there, look, you can say it's because DA drafted him, whatever you might want to say. The reality is they still closed the deal. And I think the Saints did a good job from day one, making it feel like, hey, Derek Carr is going to be our guy. That's who we want to be our quarterback. And if it works out, again, time's only going to answer that story and tell it for us. But the fact that they were able to get the deal done, I am very excited about that. And more importantly, I think for the Saints, people have to understand this. They were never going to tank. I love the idea of Caleb Williams starting for the Saints. Don't get me wrong. I would be hyped up about it. And we would probably spend the next 10, 15 years talking about how good Caleb Williams is. But that was never feasible. It stinks to say, but the Saints roster is too good to be in contention for the number one pick. But more importantly, the division is too bad for them to be in contention for the number one pick, because the Saints probably won't even be the worst team in that division, even if they didn't get Derek Carr. So now that you do have Derek Carr, I think for starters, game is on. Game's on for this. You got to win the division. No excuses. I don't want to hear any talk about injuries or whatever. Derek Carr's your quarterback. Assuming he stays healthy, the Saints have to win the NFC South. And you go from there, right? There's other factors into all this that we will discuss. And time will tell how the roster looks, whether or not I think they're worth, or I say better than most teams in the NFC. Right now, they're not. Right now, the ceiling is win the South, and who knows from there. But that's better than where they were yesterday. And I think for anyone who would have rather seen them go run it back with Andy Dalton, I think that's a little crazy. I think that you absolutely take Derek Carr over Dalton. As for people who are probably upset that this spells the end of the Jameis tenure, I feel bad for Jameis Winston. I am going to root for him wherever he goes. I wish him well. I think there's some teams where he could be a nice bridge option for them, but it just wasn't working here. And more importantly, the relationship between coach and quarterback. And you could blame whoever you want on that. And I'm sure DA will get a lot of blame, and he probably should for the way the injury was handled. It wasn't going to happen. So you bring in who they think is their guy, and you hope it works. And I do think that with Derek Carr, there are a lot of qualities that make him a pretty good fit for the Saints. For starters, really good leadership skills. That's something that the Saints are going to value. Another thing about him that I think is very underrated, he pushes the ball downfield. That's why I don't want to hear any of this Jimmy Garoppolo nonsense. Jimmy Garoppolo, the one thing he doesn't do is push the ball downfield. The one thing the Saints receivers in Rashid Shaheed and Chris Olave do really well, they get down the field. So imagine having a quarterback who couldn't utilize that part of their skill set. That would be downright atrocious. I think Derek Carr will be able to do that. And I think Derek Carr also, in terms of Pete Carmichael's scheme, I think he's going to control the line of scrimmage well. I think he's going to take some of the short passes that are there. And I think that, look, Derek Carr's not perfect. I think Derek Carr at his best is maybe the 12th best quarterback in the league. And I'm talking about 2021. I'm not talking about what we just saw. But I do think that a lot of people are kind of banging up on Carr right now for what happened this past season, when in reality, if you listen to what goes on with Josh McDaniels behind the scenes, if you pay attention to what Josh McDaniels has heard and what the players have said, and even look at their NFLPA report card, not everyone gets along with him. And I think it's fascinating that people will use that bad year of Carr to really beat up on him. But in 2021, when he lost his head coach because of emails that were obviously very offensive, and then lost his receiver in a crash that was obviously fatal, they still made the playoffs. And a big component of that was Carr kind of keeping the ship afloat. So I think he's a good quarterback. By no means do I think he's a great quarterback, but I absolutely do think that the Saints today, on paper, got better by getting Derek Carr. And I think that that's just a start. You have other positions that you need to address. And I think the Saints will address those said positions. Running back, got to get better at it. Defensive line, have to improve and get younger and faster and stronger. And you hope they do that. But this is a very nice start. It's something that gives you optimism going into this offseason, and we'll go from there. So I'm going to read some of your comments, and then I'm going to get into another thing that I want to talk about, and that is, does the signing of Derek Carr mean Michael Thomas returns to the Saints? I think that's something interesting. So I'll talk about that. But first, let's get to some of the comments you guys have here. First one, if Anthony Richardson slides to 29, do you still take him as a developmental prospect behind Carr? If Richardson fell to 29, I would say yes, because the value there is extremely good. That said, he will not fall to 29. You know, people think he's going to go top 10 at this point because of the numbers he put up at the combine. Maybe that happens. But I do think that for New Orleans, they'll probably go elsewhere. But if he's there, how do you not take him, right? That would give you a vet that can play right now in Carr, and then potentially a long-term option past him. So I think that's how the good teams keep things rolling, right? Giving themselves options for multiple seasons. And man, that would be that'd be a good one for sure. Now we get to be excited about the draft. Is if MT gets restructured too, some much needed Saints hype. Yeah, and I think that's important. And I know a lot of people today, everyone always thinks the goal is Super Bowl. And I get that, right? You play the game to win. The ultimate goal is to win the Lombardi Trophy. No one's denying that. No one should deny that. But I do think that sometimes that aspiration of being a Super Bowl champ, from a fan's perspective, I could say, and I can speak from this from experience, it almost sometimes ruins how you can enjoy a season. Yes, we want to see the Saints win a Super Bowl. No, I don't think they're ready to win one right now. But you got to take steps to get there. You don't just become one overnight. And I think there's only a handful of teams right now that year in, year out, they go in and you're like, okay, they have a shot to win it all. They have a shot to win it all. There's always going to be a couple of mystery teams sprinkled in. Yes, the Chiefs always have a shot. Yes, the Bengals now with Burrow always have a shot. The Eagles, if Hurts continues to play this well, will always have a shot. But there are always some mystery teams that you could sprinkle in. Rams from time to time, Niners from time to time. Even the Ravens with Joe Flacco a decade ago. Like, there are some random teams that make those runs because it just worked out that year for them. But you got to take those baby steps to get there. And I think to your point, Kendall, that you bring up, you are taking that next step. You are adding a little bit of optimism into a building that needed it big time. And yeah, it gives us stuff to talk about, not just for this week, but for the next couple of months. And the Saints needed that desperately. And now you feel like you don't have to reach on a quarterback if you don't love one in the draft. Because I see a lot of people talking about, well, what's Derek Carr's ceiling? We still need a long term. You can say that, and I'm not going to disagree with you. But you know what Derek Carr gives the Saints? He gives them a bridge quarterback for multiple seasons where now they can look for their next guy. And if they don't think it's this year, okay, no worries. Derek Carr's got this. You go to next year. And next year, let's say it doesn't work. Okay, how'd Derek Carr play last season? Did he play all right? Okay, another year to buy more time and find your guy. So when the time comes, you're ready to rock past, when Derek Carr's long gone from the Saints. That's the name of the game for me. I don't think you sign Derek Carr and hope that he's your quarterback for the next 10, 12 years. The guy's about to be 32. If he gives you 4 to 5 good years, awesome. It was a really good signing. But he's also going to buy you time. And I think that's an important component of all this. All of this. And I know that some people, don't love it, and that's totally okay. I can't blame you. But you got to also take into context, what the situation was prior to this. Because bringing back Winston wasn't going to happen due to the kind of, I'd say, tension in the building. And if you really wanted to bring Andy Dalton back, I think you're paying too much attention to the PFF grades. And I'll say this, right? If you come up to me and you bring up that Dalton's PFF grade was better than Carr's this year, that's fine. Go ahead if that makes you feel good at night. But when we watched the Saints games and the Saints needed big plays from Dalton, never got it. Never got it. And that's fine. Andy Dalton's not supposed to be a starter at this stage in his career. It is what it is. It just is what it is, Y'all didn't want Dalton for another season. Saints got the best option out there. Now the front runner of the division, considering last year, how can you not be happy? That's the way I'm looking at it, right? Saints are not a title favorite right now, but Lord, you got to take baby steps. And they're doing it. They're absolutely doing it. Caleb Williams going number 1 of the Falcons or Bucks. Watch. Maybe. I think the Bucks are a sleeper, right? I think the Bucks can be a really horrendous team next year, which would be good for the Saints in the short term, right? 2 games against them, you can really boost up your record. Long term, if they got Caleb, boy, oh boy, how tough does that get? But let's not worry about that yet. Let's not worry about that, Nola Gang 09 says, I feel bad for Jameis too. Yeah, look, it stinks, right? Because I don't want to say that Jameis played his way out of New Orleans because that wasn't necessarily the case. Jameis got hurt back-to-back seasons. And it stinks. It absolutely stinks. And I feel for him, and I hope that wherever he goes can really, really be that spot where he finds a home long term. I don't know if it will, but I will root for him. And I think that Jameis played at times pretty well for New Orleans. But again, you got to be on the field. He wasn't, unfortunately, able to do that. And that's for sure the problem. Saints said in the franchise back, signing Carr brings you no closer to winning Super Bowl and ties up a significant part of your cap. Here's the counter argument, right? Like, I'm fine with Saints fans not loving this move. I'm totally fine with it because, like I said, Derek Carr is not an elite quarterback. He's not the type of quarterback you sign and all of a sudden you start theorizing about what this team could be. But the Saints weren't going to just roll over and die this offseason. And I think that we have to understand the difference between what we want and what the organization wants, because the organization is trying to find every reason to keep Dennis Allen as a head coach and keep Pete Carmichael around and kind of keep this team from hitting rock bottom so they can sell tickets, so they have something to tell their fans that this is what you want to see in the fall. For us fans, yeah, we want a reset. We want, the ability that, you want that chance to just shoot to the top, right? And if you're not that good, rebuild, get your franchise quarterback, go there. It's not that easy. And you guys know, and I say this all the time as someone who's from New York, the Jets drafted 2 quarterback prospects who I really liked and did nothing with either one of them. Sam Darnold ran him out of town. Zach Wilson, he's about to be the next one run out of town. It's not as easy as just rebuilding and blowing everything up and getting your guy. Sometimes it works, right? Bengals with Joe Burrow, Jaguars with Trevor Lawrence. But how many teams to get to those moments failed? We think about the Jags. The Jags had a top 5 quarterback pick in Blake Bortles, and that didn't work out. And they had to stink far worse after that to finally get to the Trevor Lawrence. And even then, when you draft the guy, there's no guarantee that he is going to pan out. So, I totally get your point. They are no closer to a Super Bowl today as they were yesterday because I still think the ceiling right now is winning the division. But you got to take those steps to get there. And let's not forget, and I know this is a very unfair example because the odds of this ever happening again are so slim. But sometimes you need to find your Alex Smith before you get to your Patrick Mahomes. And maybe that's what Derek Carr is. Maybe Derek Carr is that high-end stopgap for the next 2, 3, maybe 4 years. And then they find their guy and they develop their guy and you go from there. So that's why when I see this move, I try to keep level-headed and I try to say, you know what? I do think that there are, some optimistic takes to pull out of this signing. And that's why I view it that way. Hope Pete doesn't make Carr look bad like he makes everyone else. Look, I actually think, with Pete, he had moments where they moved the ball. The red zone offense was terrible. I think that they got stagnant early in the game and then would figure it out later. So we'll see. The Saints aren't going to change OC. I know Daryl just asked if they should replace him. I think the Saints knew, because a lot of teams needed new OCs, they were going to be towards the bottom of candidates' wish list, right? Because if I can go to the Chargers and coach Justin Herbert, or I can go to the Saints and coach not knowing who their quarterback would be until now, which one would you pick? You would pick the Chargers, Same thing for the Ravens. I have a shot at potentially coaching Lamar, or I have go to New Orleans and I don't know who my quarterback is. Which one are you picking? You're going to pick Lamar. So I think that's why the Saints were like, hey, we got to keep Pete here, because we are not going to be at the top of coordinators' wish lists. That's just the way I view it, Carr isn't better than average, though. I actually do think he is better than average, but I don't think it's by much, if you get what I'm saying. And hear me out. I think Carr at his best is the 13th or 12th best quarterback in the league. Look at 2021. Look at some other seasons. The problem is, though, you don't often get better than that. Like, that seems to be his best. The counter, the pro to that type of quarterback, though, is if the Saints play their style of defense that they're capable of playing, average quarterback play with that defense should be enough to win a bad division. Now, that isn't the goal. The goal isn't to win a bad division. That shouldn't be the goal. But again, it's a start. I still like the move way more than I dislike the move, but it's all about what's next. And this kind of leads to Brandon's question. Do you think running back is the main pick for first round, with Bijan or Gibbs? It could be. Now, I think the Saints need to really beef up their defensive line. I can't stress that enough. But you know what? Maybe the Saints are looking around and going, hey, we didn't hit on Davenport in the first. We didn't hit on Peyton Turner in the first. Maybe they want to go elsewhere. But I'll say this too. If Bijan Robinson is there at 29, it's very hard to pass him up, because I think that you're battling the conventional wisdom of don't draft a running back first round versus this kid is a top 10 prospect. And those ideologies are going to clash, and it's a matter of which one wins out. But, if the Saints are all about this year, how do you not draft one of those guys at 29? That would be the argument. And again, I'm not saying the Saints should take Bijan Robinson. I'm just saying if Bijan Robinson's there at 29, you are getting a top 10 prospect at that pick that is going to pay immediate dividends, because Kamara could miss time. And with Alvin out, you're going to need someone to step up. Bijan seems like the type of kid who can win Offensive Rookie of the Year. And that is pretty much the perfect replacement if you needed one for the season. So I can't knock that. And Brandon, you mentioned Gibbs as well. Gibbs reminds me of Alvin an awful lot. So that's another player who you can look at and say, okay, that seems to be an interesting, potential draft pick for the Saints. But we'll see. I would not be opposed to it. I'll make that very clear. Demetrius asks, what are the chances having a solid QB brings Michael Thomas back on a team-friendly deal? So let's use that to segue into something I've been wanting to talk about, Michael Thomas. Great question, by the way, Demetrius. So we'll segue that into that discussion. I think Michael Thomas, I started getting the sense, and I thought this relationship was over, but I started getting the sense that the door is left open when he starts resharing Saints stuff. He starts kind of showing his interest in Derek Carr and the Saints quarterback moves. And my thought is, like, if you're showing interest in that, then you're not ready to leave New Orleans yet, right? Because if you're ready to leave New Orleans, you wouldn't give a rat's ass what they're doing at quarterback. But he was paying attention, and then it starts coming out that the door's not closed. Then you hear the whispers at the combine that, hey, maybe they can rework something out if they get the right quarterback in. So if I'm Michael Thomas, I view it as this. How affected am I by this Saints training staff, the coaching staff? Like, is he that turned off by them? If the answer is no, then you stay in New Orleans. You're around a staff that you've been recovering for a while. And we all know when Michael Thomas is healthy, and it's a big if, and the when is not often, but when he's healthy, he's still Michael Thomas. Do you find a way to do an incentive-based deal where if you hit a certain amount of numbers, you're going to get your money? And I think that the reason I say that is I don't think it's as simple if Mike leaves the Saints, he's going to get his money elsewhere. I don't. I think teams around the league are going to say, hey, look, we know you're talented. We know that when you're on the field, you're number one, but you're not on the field enough. And that could lead to him going elsewhere. and getting used to a new franchise, and maybe it works. Maybe it's like a Juju Smith-Schuster thing where you go to another team, you win a Super Bowl, and all is fine and dandy. And maybe it is. And trust me, I would wish nothing more than that for Mike, because Mike is an absolute dog. But I do think that the door is open. And I think Derek Carr going to the Saints now increases the chances of you keeping Michael Thomas, because you're all about finding a way to win now. And you're not keeping him under his current number, obviously. So if you can rework a deal, bring him back, why not? I still think that the Saints need to improve that receiving group, right? I love Chris Olave. I love Rashid Shaheed, and I've raved about both of them, and I will continue to rave about both of them probably for the next couple of years, because I think there's a lot to like between those two. They don't have a possession receiver, and I fight with everyone on this. I think Michael Thomas is the best possession receiver of his generation so far. You could bring him back in the fold. He can work the short routes. He gives Derek Carr a nice option that he can rely on when he's on the field. Why not? If the money works out for both sides, I think the Saints should absolutely do it. Now, I don't know if it will happen, but the fact that we're able to have this discussion and it doesn't sound like just some type of lunacy, that shows that the door has not been closed. So to Demetrius' point, to kind of like bring this full circle, I think that Derek Carr going to the Saints increases their chances of bringing back Michael Thomas. They just got to figure out a deal that works for both sides. But Lord, would that be intriguing. And look, man, let's not act like Mike didn't look great in that Falcons game. That's the funny thing. Like, your main complaint should be he's not on the field. We shouldn't say whether or not he's washed, though, because he's not washed. He's injury prone. It's a big difference. But 1-year deal, money works out both ways. You're going for it anyway. By acquiring Carr, you're going for it. So we'll see what it goes from there. But I do think that would be the next step for the Saints. I like this move. It would be nice to get a potential franchise quarterback out of the draft, but our picks just won't bring that guy this year or next. The team is too deep and the division is too bad. Also part of it, man, right? If the Saints had their own pick, I don't think they're looking at Carr. I don't, because you have pick 10, and then you would have, let's say, pick 29 from the Broncos. You're talking about whether or not you can go get an Anthony Richardson or trade up and get a Stroud or get a Will Levis. I think that's what you're looking at. But you're not. You're at 29. And 29 is not going to get you a game changer at quarterback. It's just not. It's not the way this draft works anymore. It's so top 10 heavy, where if you're not there, you're not getting the guy. And if you're not in that spot, you got to wait till you do get in that spot. So, I think that New Orleans, absolutely, things would have been different. But to your point, they're not in that situation. Got to do what's the next best thing. And I think that, the idea of Carr and maybe adding Hooker to that roster is intriguing, but again, no guarantees there. And I do think that for the Saints, there is that discussion as whether or not you really want to use any of these picks on a quarterback. Do you want to just bring back a vet as your backup? Who knows? Maybe Andy Dalton doesn't have a huge market and you bring back Dalton as your backup. And Lord knows that's actually not the worst situation in the world. It's really not. If Dalton's their backup, there is a comfort level of, all right, Derek, let's say sprains his ankle. He's out for 2-3 games. All right, not great, but Andy Dalton for 2-3 games is okay. It's when he's starting for 15, 16, 17. You're like, all right, I can't do this. Okay. And again, to other people's points, it's a better option. It definitely is a better option. Carr is willing and able to push the ball downfield. Olave, big year too, especially if MT comes back. That's a big upgrade in a needy offense. Yeah, look, I think that's an important aspect of all this. Derek Carr, again, there are flaws to his game. I think sometimes he crumbles under pressure, and I do think that Derek Carr has these moments where I go, man, what were you looking at? Because you're better than that read that you just made. But when Derek Carr is on, he's on, and he is a very fun quarterback to watch when he's in the zone. And I think the one thing I do like about Carr a lot, and he won't have to do this in the NFC South, but it's what I liked about him. I felt like some of his best games were when he had to measure up against another quarterback. Mainly Mahomes. I think a lot of his best games were against the Chiefs, and that's where I liked watching him play a lot, when he had to rise to that level. Now, he would lose the game because, boy, you are not beating Patrick Mahomes in a shootout. But there were moments there where I'm like, that's a great quarterback. Now, he isn't a great quarterback because he's too inconsistent, but he is good. And I always think about when Matt Stafford got traded from the Lions, there were a lot of people that love to say, man, I don't want Matt Stafford. He's not good. But He goes to the Rams, wins a Super Bowl, and then all of a sudden the narrative starts changing. They're like, well, if he wins another one, is he a Hall of Famer? Well, how did we get from you didn't think Stafford was any good to he can be a Hall of Famer if he wins another Super Bowl? Like, again, Derek Carr is not in the Hall of Fame discussion. He never will be, nor should he. But you watch a quarterback on a bad roster that's poorly constructed, and he gets all the blame. The Raiders have been historically bad on defense with Derek Carr as a quarterback. But more importantly, they've been historically bad at drafting when Derek Carr is their quarterback. Alex Leatherwood didn't work out. Henry Ruggs didn't work out. Damon Arnett didn't work out. Jonathan Abram didn't work out. Blowing through, Cleveland Farrell, another one, blowing through first-round picks. The only first-round pick the Raiders hit on with Derek Carr, where I said he's been a great player for them, Josh Jacobs. And guess what? Josh Jacobs saved his best year for a contract year. So there are concerns in that regard that the Raiders didn't put enough structurally around Derek Carr. Now, again, not elite, but he'll have a lot more support in New Orleans than he did in Vegas. And I think that's important, you know? Got to work, but just popped in to say Carr was the best realistic option. I'm worried that he'll allow DA and P. Carmichael to linger too long. It could be. But you know what? He was, like you said, the best realistic option. Caleb Williams was not on the table. Trading for Lamar was not on the table. Because a lot of people brought up the Lamar thing, right? And they were like, hey, got to trade 2 first-round picks for Lamar? That's it? I would do it. It's not that simple. I think the Ravens kind of want that non-exclusive tag on Lamar so other teams can set his market. And then they can say, hey, you know what? We'll match it. That's fine. We know what he is now. We're going to match it. Or teams that have better draft assets, because the Saints would have to wait till after the draft to sign Lamar because you have to be able to give up your first-round picks of your own. It's not give up the 29th and next year's first because they don't technically own the 29th. The draft rights originally belonged to, I believe, the 49ers. Then it went to the Dolphins and then the Broncos, now the Saints. So, yeah, that pick's been around the block. But, yeah, that never felt realistic. I mean, you guys know I love Lamar, but that never felt realistic. So this was their best option. Jameis Winston to the Jets. I'm going to be honest. I'll tell you the fit that I really like for Jameis Winston. I think that for Jameis, and obviously Jameis is most likely going to be cut, and Adam Schefter just saying it now. I think that the spot that I'd love to see Jameis in, I'd love to see him in Miami. And the reason I say that is Tua is not, obviously durable at the moment. Could you imagine Jameis throwing bombs to Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill? Like that just seems fun as hell to me. And that might be the spot where, like, yeah, he's not the week 1 starter, but if Tua goes down, he can take advantage of that moment. In talent-wise, I don't think there's a huge talent gap between Jameis and Tua. I'd actually argue Jameis is more talented. So that's actually the fit that I like better for Jameis. Gets to go back to the Sunshine State. I don't know, just speculating. But again, Jameis is probably going to get cut. They just talked about it here. But if they do post June 1st, which I'd imagine that might be what they're looking at, you'd save a little bit over $12 million in cap space, probably close to 13. And I think it's the right move for Jameis. He should not be held captive on this roster, nor will he. Saints will probably go a cheaper option as the backup and go from there. I like this comment here because this is a good point. So you bring up what Carr's gone up against. Carr went from Mahomes and Justin Herbert, and obviously the ghost of Russell Wilson, but that was fine, to playing in the NFC South. When everyone was talking about why he would pick the Saints, I thought this was a big factor in it. The dome played a big factor because Derek Carr is not a great cold weather quarterback. So he's going to play in Tampa on the road, warm. He's going to play in another dome in Atlanta, Carolina, if you get them early, nice conditions. So for the 8 home games and then those 3 road games, he's got about 11 games that are going to be in really good conditions. And depending on who they play elsewhere and depending on how the schedule shakes out, he might have to play 2 cold weather games the whole year? That's a pro. But more importantly, the competition. He might very well face Kyle Trask, Desmond Ridder, and Sam Darnold next season. Now, that might not be the picture. Panthers might draft Anthony Richardson. Falcons could, who knows, swing a trade for Lamar. I don't know if that'll happen, but who knows? Maybe one of those teams signs Jimmy Garoppolo. Who knows? Bearing a Lamar Jackson trade, Derek Carr will be the best quarterback in the NFC South. So he'll go from being the maybe 3rd best quarterback in the AFC West, but 4th best if Russell Wilson gets back to where he is, to the best quarterback in the division he's in. That's a huge jump. That's a huge jump. And it makes a difference. It absolutely makes a difference. It's going to be real interesting to see what the Jets do now. And obviously, Jack adding that he thinks the Jets are going to wait on Rodgers or trade for Lamar. So as a New York boy, I'm telling you right now, it makes me feel good that this thing happened, because the one thing I don't like, and fans get greedy, when you don't have a great historical run when it comes to quarterbacks, you should not get picky with them. And again, I don't think the Jets were Derek Carr's first choice. I actually do believe that the Saints were his first choice. I really do. If the Jets were his first choice, though, and the Jets were too busy paying attention to whether or not Aaron Rodgers is going to play for them this year, when Aaron Rodgers loves attention and is going to milk this thing until the sun sets, you get what you deserve. You get what you deserve. You can't play Zach Wilson and Mike White and then get picky at quarterback. You can't do it. And if they miss on Aaron Rodgers, all of a sudden, you guys start talking about whether or not Carr could save Pete and DA's job. If the Jets miss out on Aaron Rodgers, someone's going to lose their job in New York, because you missed out on Carr because you were so focused on getting Rodgers that you didn't even get Rodgers after when it was all said and done. So you missed on plan A, you missed on plan B, and all of a sudden, who's the option at QB? I really don't know. So this is really fascinating to me. We'll see what happens there in New York. Not that it's our concern, but sometimes you gotta go for it and you gotta decide. And the one thing I love that the Saints did, whether you like it or not, they said, Derek Carr, you are our plan A, B, and C. That's it. And when the dust settled, he said, you know what? I'm going to go to the team that wants me. And again, I don't know if it's going to work out, but they made it clear he was their guy, and they got rewarded because of it. So sometimes you got to play that game. Devontae Adams, the Saints, he wanted to play with Carr. Only receiver he says he chose. Only reason he chose the Raiders. I don't think that's going to happen. It would be so much of a cap issue for the Raiders because they gave him a huge contract. But I think that for them, I think that you probably just go look around. Look at Jimmy's. You look at maybe see if you could trade for Mac Jones. If Rodgers available, that's who you're swinging for if you're the Raiders. But I really don't think that Devontae will get moved. I really don't. Our pick should be QB, D-line, wide receiver, linebacker, or just draft best player available. Yeah, I think you take QB out for now. I think that the Saints giving a 4-year deal. I don't think the Saints love any quarterback in this class where they're picking. I want to specify that. The Saints probably like Bryce Young. They probably like CJ Stroud. They're not going to be able to pick either one. So they're probably saying, do we love Hendon Hooker? Maybe not. Maybe we like him. We don't love him. And if you don't love the quarterback, I don't think you take the quarterback, because the Saints have had a lot of success on day 2 with other players, given their history. Pete Werner, day 2 pick. Alontae Taylor, day 2 pick. Eric McCoy, day 2 pick. They've really done well in that regard. So I think D-line, you're absolutely right. Wide receiver, they could use another wide receiver, no doubt. But running back would be another one. I think running back is very much towards the top of the list. Now, I know you guys are talking about grabbing a young quarterback. The Saints should only do that if they like a quarterback prospect or love a quarterback prospect in this draft. I do not think they should just take one just to take one. You have to like them and see a fit there. You have to see the fit. If you don't see the fit, you're just kind of wasting a pick. You really could. Lyndon says, you know how much worse this offseason could have gone? Sean could have gone back to Fox and no QB. I'm ecstatic. Look, right? Like, again, I'm not sitting here going, the Saints are going to the Super Bowl. I'm not, because I'm a realistic human being for the most part. But they could have had no first-round pick, which means they couldn't address a position of need. They could have got no Derek Carr, which means we're very much staring down the barrel of Andy Dalton's your starter again. And what a bleak outlook that would be. At least for the moment, we have some faith and some hope. And that could get crushed by September. Don't count me out on that. It could. But we got it at least. And I'd rather have that than run the same thing that they just had. I'd rather. Absolutely rather. Average Cody says, who says no? Darren Waller for our 29th pick. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not trying to make a hot take here. I think the Saints would be better served having that 29th pick than having Darren Waller, because Waller, for a plethora of reasons, expensive, did get hurt a lot last year, and this is the third part and the most important part. Juwan Johnson took that next step last year. Who's to say Juwan doesn't take another step with Derek Carr at quarterback? Derek Carr usually likes using his tight ends. Maybe he takes that next spot. And I just think that, he could elevate a little bit more, and that can help. Now, I don't hate the suggestion. I think that's a very interesting suggestion. It gives us something to talk about. There is that relationship that's already built in. But I think for the Saints, they can go a pick at 29, get someone else, bring back Juwan, and maybe Derek Carr and Juwan really hit it off. It's possible. It really is. I really think it's possible. But to Kyle's point here, and this is why I want pick 29 to keep, you need to beef up that D-line. And there's going to be options out there, as Kyle mentioned. So for the Saints, I'd rather have that 29th pick. 5 years of team control. There's that uncertainty of what if you hit on a really good player. That's where I would be at. But I don't hate that suggestion. I think that's actually very intriguing. Just the thought of it. But I just don't think that's going to happen. I just don't. Do you think with this deal that we're still able to get a few free agents to help plug some holes so we're able to get the best available in the draft? We'll see. We'll see. I think for the Saints, I think that it all depends what Derek Carr's contract looks like. The cap hit, base salary, all that. And then you could go from there. But the Saints have, for me, a need at running back where they can kind of address that in the draft, or they can address that via cheap free agent. I don't think Leonard Fournette's going to break the bank. I don't think Deontay Foreman's going to break the bank. So maybe they go that route. D-line, I think they'll have to go through the draft, though, because good defensive linemen, you got to pay for. So I do think for that one, Lou, you're probably going to have to wait. But as people are throwing in the chat, some really good options out there. I think that you can do this. You can do this later. You can get a running back later. You could get D-line early, or you go D-line early in the draft, D-line middle of the draft, and get your running back in free agency. There's options out there. There are options out there. Draft Hendon Hooker in the later rounds. I'm going to say if he's there at 40, maybe. If he's there at 70, definitely. But who knows? Who knows? We'll see what happens. Whoa, is this real? I just woke up. What the hell is going on? Well, you have a new quarterback. That's what's going on. Derek Carr, Saints win that sweepstakes there. It's nice to win one, as Kevin Malone said in the office. It really is. Too early to say the Saints should not have drafted Penning so that they would have the 10th and 29th pick currently. Well, fascinating enough, technically, I think looking back at the draft, Olave's where the Eagles comp kind of went to. So I'd rather think, Olave's been so good, it's hard to knock that. But if Penning delivers, I think we will forget about that trade. I think over time we will forget about that trade if Penning delivers. I really do. Because Penning plays such an important position. If Penning becomes a franchise left tackle, we're gonna forget about certain things. We're going to. But he's got to be on the field. He's got to. And if he can, we're also going to look at the 2022 draft differently. Penning, Olave, Alontae Taylor, Rashid Shaheed. That's a pretty good group to get in from 1 year, So that's where I'm at. Saints projected wins with Dalton were 9. Saints projected win with Derek Carr, 9.3. Look, the Saints still have work to do. I think that, that I'm not necessarily a huge fan of the projected win stuff because, the roster's pretty much stayed the same. So they're saying he's 0.3 better, fine. But I think you're also kind of buying on a Derek Carr who didn't have a good year versus Andy Dalton who kind of overachieved. And I think that's what factors in to that equation, So we'll see what happens. We'll absolutely see what happens. But I do think they're a better team, though. I do. I think they're better than 0.3. Thoughts on if we have MT still? I said it before. And I'll pull up some other comments as well on this subject. I think that bringing in Derek Carr increases your chances of keeping Michael Thomas. But I do think that there's going to be, more work that needs to be done there. I really do. And I think that for the Saints, it's all about you got better at quarterback. Now it's about mending your relationship with Michael Thomas. Hopefully they can do that. And then once you figure that out, if you do mend that relationship, you can address D-line. You can address running back. You can address, another receiver if you want one. You can go maybe look at tight ends. There's other options, but I do think that with MT, the odds go up with Derek Carr in the building. I really do feel that way. I really do. Man, I hate this for Jabu, though. Yeah, I do too, but you know what? It's unfortunately the business part of the NFL. It really is. And it stinks to say, but these guys are used to it. And I hope that Jameis Winston falls in a spot where he'll have his chance. And I wish him nothing but the best. I made that so abundantly clear. And I will. There's no reason to knock him. But we'll see. We'll absolutely see what happens. Josh Jacobs, New Orleans, not going to happen. They're going to tag him. But it's fascinating nonetheless. Brandon says, do you think Jarvis is gone? Not necessarily. I don't think Jarvis is going to cost anything anyway, regardless of where he goes. Took a prove-it deal. Didn't really get to do much. And that's kind of it. But for New Orleans, though, if he's really cheap, yeah, maybe you take another flyer. I think, though, I'd rather them draft a receiver. I kind of would rather them draft a receiver and keep Michael Thomas, if I could, in a perfect world, than go back down the Jarvis route again, because I think Jarvis is older. He's also injury-prone. I got some doubts there. But we'll see what happens, man. We'll see what happens. Some act as if the Saints had a top 15 quarterback on the roster. Carr is a top 12, borderline top 10 QB, in my opinion. Simple. Do you want Carr or Dalton as your starter? I will wait. Yeah, Carr, right? Yeah, look, I don't think he's top 10, but top 12 is his ceiling, and Dalton's never top 12. And again, not a knock on Dalton. He just shouldn't be a starter at this stage in his career. He had his time at the Bengals. He was a Pro Bowl caliber player for a little bit there. And that was it. Like the time ran out there. And I think that you want the better option. For fans that are complaining, that's fine. Let's see how this all plays out. But I'd be understanding as to why the Saints did this. Just like I'm understanding of why Saints fans might not be unanimously on board with this. Understand why the Saints went for Derek Carr. Got to understand it, What do you think of a potential Allen Robinson trade? I know he was underutilized in that deep shot Rams offense. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't mind the idea of getting them out, Allen Robinson, but I would just play the Rams. I would call their bluff out. See if they cut him, because I don't think they want him on that salary. And I don't think the Saints would want him on that salary. And if the Saints are going to go with a vet who's older, didn't have a good year, I'd rather them just try and rehash things out with Michael Thomas. But it's not the worst suggestion in the world. But I would really try to call the Rams bluff. I can't see the Rams keeping him on that number. They got rid of Wagner. They're probably going to get rid of Jalen Ramsey. They're going to get rid of Leonard Floyd. The Rams are entering a little bit of a rebuild here. So I would probably call their bluff. And if they don't, fine, but I'd call it. Nolan Smith at 29, I beg. Man, would that be a fun fit. He doesn't fit their prototype, but he would be a really intriguing piece for the Saints defense. So I do like that suggestion. That was an interesting suggestion. How big of a money save is cutting Winston? If it's post June 1st designation, $12.8 million in cap space. It's a lot of money that the Saints can save, and would allow them, maybe you get your draft picks and then not sign the draft picks till after June 1st, maybe. That's possible. So we'll see. Saints will be hosting a playoff game. I'm over the moon. That's the goal, right? Like, I think the Saints have so far to go till they're a contender. But what I'll say about the rest of the NFC is, the Eagles and the 49ers, they're up here. Everyone else is down here. So the Saints could hypothetically beat a Vikings team or beat a Cowboys team in the playoffs. Now, you probably get absolutely, rocked by the Eagles in the playoffs with Hurts. But the rest of the NFC is bad. I think there's this weird thing where, people are like, oh, you can only win the South. Okay, sure. The NFC North is not that great. Now, the Lions are on the come up. I think the Vikings are going to be on the downswing, and the Packers, I don't know if Aaron Rodgers is coming or going, so I can't really answer that one. But I do think that the rest of the NFC is pretty much up for grabs outside of those two teams. I think those two teams are head and shoulders better than everyone else. Not a lot to love about the rest of the NFC, Why not trade the 29th pick and more picks to address all the needs? In what way? Like trade down? If that's the case, maybe. But I do think that that the Saints, they got needs for sure. I think running back and D-line are the ones I'm looking at big time. Like the ones where it's like glaring needs to me. Maybe you add another safety. They could get younger at that position. Didn't love what Marcus May brought. I thought Tyrann Mathieu was exceptional at the end of the season. But we'll see. I want to let free agency play out, and then we'll go into the draft knowing what the Saints need, which is the beauty of it. And we'll go from there. I like the Baylor defensive tackle for us if he's available. He's another one lumped in that defensive line group where it's like, if they take any of these five, you're selling me. I'll never complain about defensive lineman pick. The only reason I complained about Davenport, as did many of you, was you traded 2 first-round picks technically for him. That's the way I see it. trash choice. Carr has been on the decline for the past 3 seasons. I actually think Carr has been on the decline for 1 season. Hear me out. Numbers-wise, it'll look like Derek Carr has been playing on the decline, right? Because you'll look at his numbers from the 2020 season and say he went from 27 touchdowns and 9 picks to 23 touchdowns and 14 picks. But I will tell you from now, Derek Carr in 2021 was a better quarterback than he was in 2020. He played under intense scrutiny. He played under horrible team conditions. No coach, wide receiver, your best wide receiver gets cut because of a horrible car accident that happened. And they make the playoffs against all odds. And he was the backbone of that locker room. His teammates all say it. And sometimes I don't buy too much into the numbers. The numbers are important, right? Your quarterback, you got to put up good numbers. But you can get good quarterback play with your numbers not looking as great. You know? And what I mean by that is, and I don't want to compare the quarterbacks because this guy is 30 times better than Derek Carr will ever be. But Drew Brees went from 37 touchdowns and 15 picks in 2016 to 23 touchdowns and 8 picks in 2017. I don't care that he threw 14 less touchdowns. He was super efficient. He made the throws that had to be made in game-winning situations. And Derek Carr, the one thing that I'll give him, and you can't take away from him, he plays really well in fourth quarter situations. He's towards the top of the list in active quarterbacks. He's got more fourth quarter comebacks than Aaron Rodgers. He's got more game-winning drives than Aaron Rodgers. I think that he does well in that regard. Again, he is not elite, but he is a top 5 quarterback in the NFC. I'm not saying much because the AFC has Burrow, Mahomes, Allen, Lawrence, Lamar. I mean, Jesus Christ, they got so many. They might have Jesus Christ in there too at this point. They have so many good quarterbacks in the AFC. You go to the NFC, a weaker field. I think that it makes a lot of sense. I really do. And I see you guys talking about Carr tweeting who dat and then Michael Thomas retweeting it. All I'm saying is Michael Thomas is using social media as a guy that is interested in staying in New Orleans. That's the way I view it. So Drew had a little bit to do with the Carr signing. Brees as a QB coach for the Saints, ? I asked Drew Brees before the Super Bowl if he was going to coach, and he made it seem like he was not going to coach because of the time commitment. He said he had offers. That's what I found interesting. But he said he didn't want to do it because of time commitment. So I still think that Drew is a little bit of a ways away from being a coach. I think one day he might consider it. But that day is not today. Interesting, though, that he played a factor in this. I know he does have a decent connection with Carr. I know that he's a huge fan of Derek Carr. That makes a lot of sense. But I don't think he'll go down the coaching route again. Anyway, guys, it's been a fun about 50 minutes with you guys. I am very thrilled that the Saints won the sweepstakes for Derek Carr. I think this gives you a little bit of optimism for next season. Now you're turning the page. It's like you got Derek Carr. What is next? Where do you go from here? Can you go get Michael Thomas back in the fold? Then can you go get a defensive lineman to make you a better team in the trenches? Then in the draft, can you go get a Bijan Robinson or Jahmyr Gibbs or Tyjae Spears, someone to really elevate your backfield? That's what I'm looking at there. But we'll see. Now, I know people will say this puts him out of the Lamar sweepstakes. I see your comment, Mike. Trust me, Mike, there's no one I would have rather had more this offseason than Lamar. Never really felt realistic, though. But who knows? Well, I kind of hope Lamar just stays in Baltimore. Would rather that than he comes to the NFC. But anyway, guys, that's going to do it for this live stream. I appreciate all the comments you left. It really meant a lot. It's always fun talking Saints football with you guys. I hope you guys like the move. If you don't like the move, totally fine. Let's hope that the Saints can build off this, though, because it's not as simple as bringing Derek Carr and everything's fixed. You have other things to get taken care of, but we'll go from there. But that's going to do it, guys. Enjoy the rest of your week. I'll be back with more Saints content over the next couple of days. But until then, see if the Saints can keep things moving. I'll be here talking about it on the Straight Up Saints podcast.